Hi, Lauren Grace here, and welcome to the show. And I'm joined today by Ian White. After obtaining his Bachelor of Science from the University of New South Wales and graduating from the New South Wales College of Natural Therapies, Ian has been practicing successfully as a naturopath for over 40 years. He is the founder of the Australian Bushflower Essence and is a fifth generation Australian herbalist. Ian has spent over 30 years traveling all over Australia, researching and developing a range of over 70 specific bush essences. Ian is the author of 5 major books and runs regular seminars and workshops on the bush essences in over 30 countries throughout the world. And he also does online workshops as well. Ian is joining me today. We're going to be talking primarily about I want to talk about life as a naturopath, but I also want to talk a lot about bush flower and the power of bush flowers to heal. So Ian, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to have you on the show.
My pleasure, Lauren.
So Ian, I need to ask you how it all sort of began. I know that you come from a long line of herbalists. I know that this has really been from the maternal line of your family. But I'm really curious about whether or not you were always spiritual. Did you sort of come to earth that way? How did it sort of begin for you?
Well, I probably did, though I wouldn't have remembered it. So I grew up in Terry Hills, which is northwest of Sydney, about an hour from the CBD. And my parents' property backed onto Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park, as did my grandmother, who lived the next property below. You could clamber down a cliff or you go to a dirt road to her house. So as a young boy, I found it far more exciting spending the day with her than going to school. So I developed this habit, usually after my father left work. He was a pharmacist, but also a herbalist. And my mum was a soft touch, and she was a bookkeeper. So I'd be doubled up in pain, pleading that I wanted to go to school. And she said, "Oh, no, I think you're far too sick. You better go and spend the day with your grandmother." And, you know, we'd go bushwalking. I'd help her make up all the tinctures and extracts, and generally had a really good time. And I think the legacy I got from that was in the bush, there are all these plants of very powerful healing qualities. My grandmother and great-grandmother were some of the first white people looking at medicinal properties of Australian plants. And unfortunately, when I would have been about 8, my grandmother went traveling overseas and she got separated from all her bags. And she was a heavy smoker, and unbeknown to the family, she'd been riddled with cancer even before I was born, but she kept at bay with her various herbs. But without them and the stress of traveling, she got very sick, went into a coma, was flown back. And none of that information was written down. Then I've got a couple of books talking of, you know, formulas and plants that they use, but a lot of knowledge, unfortunately, was lost. But like the indigenous people around Sydney got killed off with influenza and smallpox. So, you know, I went off. I was studying at university. I was doing a science degree. Holidays, I went traveling to India, got pretty ill emotionally and physically, and came back a bit of a mess. And that led me to working with herbs, and got really interested again in natural therapies. And, you know, when I finished my degree, really, I realized that, which I've been trying to combine with natural therapies, that's what I was interested in. So I then went off and studied and became a naturopath.
I think that you said something really key there, which I want to, you know, sort of jam on with you in a second, which is about, you mentioned physical and emotional. And I think that we don't always necessarily think about putting those two together. I just want to also, you know, I guess empathize with the fact that when we have this knowledge and it is sort of taken away from us, that, you know, there's a lot of wisdom that's kind of left there, maybe for us to discover ourselves in a new way. Do you think that, you know, there might have been a silver lining on some level about you kind of finding your own methodology and your own connection to the plant kingdom?
It was really, you know, like, I suppose the family tradition being looking at, as you mentioned, the physical, where what happened, I've ended up looking more the emotional and the spiritual. And if we look at traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, they'll say like 90% of our symptoms stem from those emotional, spiritual imbalances. And they've had, you know, thousands of years of observing human nature to be very specific, that if you're very fearful, then you'll end up with kidney problems. If you're very angry, then you're going to have problems with the liver. So by working on that emotional triggers and the causes, you end up by default, if you like, working on the physical.
Yes, I love that. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about a little bit later in our time together is about a major mistake that I've been using in terms of bush flower remedies. So I'll share that with you and our listener at home in just a moment. But can we talk a bit about how your work with the plant kingdom complements your work as a naturopath? One of the things that I think is so fantastic and interesting about life is that as we get older and we learn new ways of doing things, I sort of feel that we have almost this backpack of tools that we can share with other people, and they're not always derived from maybe the training that you did at the college, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when I graduated, I was a homeopath, really. And this was back in the 70s, and I'd been exposed at the college to bark flower remedies, which I really liked. The fact that they were simple, anyone could use them. You didn't have to be trained for 3 years as in medicine or homeopathy to be able to use them. But no one was working with Australian plants, so I didn't do too much with them. And then I got in, I used to like hands-on with my patients, but in homeopathy, you're repertorizing, you're asking questions, looking at all your books, trying to match all their symptoms to a single remedy. But I like that hands-on. There really wasn't time to either do a massage or you do that. And then I got, exposed to kinesiology, which was lovely. You could do muscle testing, and you had the hands-on, the interaction with people. And then it was really in a similar way that I was already established as a practitioner. A friend of mine who I'd shared a house with when we were students, he'd been diagnosed with bowel cancer. And this was a young man, early 30s, charismatic, successful in all areas of his life. Last person you think would have a serious illness. And as well as doing my naturopathy, getting involved with herbal medicine, when I came back from India, I started doing Tai Chi, yoga, meditation. So he asked me, as a result of that background, if we'd run a healing circle for him. And, all our friends were in shock that he was sick. So we all came. There was some, directing, visualization, meditation, sending energy. And when they operated the next day, they found out that the cancer had spread everywhere through his body. And so we kept that healing circle on a regular basis. And he died about 6 months later, and shortly after his death, in the meditations in the healing circles, I started getting pictures of plants, told what to do and make them up. And probably because of my home, it was. Yeah. And I didn't know the plant. There'd be a little caption underneath for the botanic name, and I'm more feeling meditation, not so much visual. So that was very exciting. And I'd be told to go and make flannel flower in a particular area. I think flannel flower doesn't grow there, and I'd go there and there's a massive flannel flower. And
oh my God.
And because I had the remedies and I was already in practice, I found there was a synchronicity. Patients coming to me all needed that particular essence that I just made. So I was, this is on the right track, but also gave me the opportunity to observe how they worked. And, for about 2 years, I was in the bush all the time, researching. A couple of essences came through in dreams. And, in those days, I was only giving the remedies in a singular way, probably because of the homeopathic background. And then, if a man came, his wife, who I'd been treating, 8 months pregnant, involved in a horrendous car accident. She was in a coma. They didn't think she was going to make it, had lost the baby. And in a voice, he said, I know there's something you can do to help. An invoice told me to mix 5 remedies together. And that became the basis of what's become our first combination that I ever used on the patient, but also the emergency essence. So it was interesting how the homeopathy led to that. And, I don't see patients full time, but, I like doing it. And, I'll weave in with, especially with kinesiology, it seems a very nice way to, and numerology. I studied numerology when I was studying my naturopathy. So it gives you great quick insights into what's going on for a person. Then you've got the essences to help balance it. But it's like you said, like you have a toolkit.
Yeah.
And, okay, you can use this, or, maybe prescribe they go and get some herbs as well, or, maybe some fasting would be really good. And within essences, there's the 70 bush essences, but there's also 3 ranges of spiritual essences. So it's almost like you've got, this person needs a flower, this one's going to need something else. And like from that toolkit, you can, find what the people need. And I believe you don't attract someone as a patient to you unless you can be of help to them. So, like and sometimes you just talking them and you get this flash, something that, tissue salt, you haven't used those for a long time, for example, and they seem appropriate to use.
I love that so much. I will say as well, I have used Emergency and I really like it. And I will talk about some of my faux pas, my big faux pas a little bit later. When you were speaking, Ian, number one, I want to say that one of the affirmations that I use is I attract those physical and non-physical in harmony with me. And that's kind of my agreement with source energy as well, that anybody that I'm attracting to help or to work with is really somebody that I can serve. I think much like what probably you've intended. When you were speaking, one of the things that came to mind, going back to the toolkit concept here, was that you seem very in tune with your intuition. And it's funny because last year I remembered, I'll use the words at the same time, that I'm a medium. And it's been one of the biggest tests of, I guess, trust and intuition ever, to get that information to come through and to back that. You started in the plant world from such a young age. Did it become something that was easy for you to do, to get that vision of a plant in meditation and to go out there and to start working with that? Did you sort of have already ingrained practices about how to trust your intuition? Because that's a big part about what I think people miss sometimes.
Yeah, probably not, in that when my grandmother died, end up going back to school and still go out in the bush. But in terms of that healing qualities, like I don't remember specific plants anymore, just left with that legacy that, these plants have strong healing qualities. And I think for me, we've all got different gifts. And I think meditation was really that key to helping fine tune that intuition, probably the experience of being out in the bush and with plants and having a very, feeling very comfortable with them. If we look at past lives, I think I've been a herbalist but often as a monk or a hermit. And, this lifetime was like, well, no, you can't just in the back. You've got to, take that information, knowledge you have and share it a bit more than what you've done in the past. So, and with my patients workshops, I say, look, meditation, I think, is one of the most important things people can do. Okay, not only reducing the stress, but getting that own inner guidance and direction. And, for me, it was getting really sick in India, which led me to getting back into healing. Maybe if I had been doing meditation earlier, I wouldn't have had to go through the traumatic experience of what I went through of, getting very ill in India. That sometimes we need those Mack truck experiences to sort of shift us back on the right path when we've gone wandering off too far from what we originally set off to do.
Yeah. Isn't that, I always find that that's the silver lining in some of those situations. I would not wish a Mack truck on anybody. And when I've had that before in the past, I'm like needing to make a conscientious effort of noticing the signs before it gets to that stage. But I love, the resilience that people show, and especially when we're on the spiritual path where we kind of understand in a way that things are really aligning themselves or realigning themselves for us to find our way to our true purpose. You said in your book, and I will say that I have the Australian Bushflower Remedies book, which I just think is so beautiful and I love it. And I want to tell you a little bit later about how I've also been using it, which is interesting. But one of the things that you mentioned in there is you talk about how these bush flowers can really assist us in clearing our blocks to really connect us to our higher self. And I was just sort of wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that. And just before you do, I do want to say that you talked about, almost your ability to be able to really listen to that inner guidance. Do you ever, that's another question, but I'll throw it to you anyway.
Yeah.
How important is it for us to connect to our higher selves versus looking outside of ourselves to connect to ourselves, which I think many people get lost in that sort of journey of doing that.
Yeah. I think if you when you realize that guidance is flowing down and we can tap into it, it takes a lot of the struggle out of life and gives you that confidence that, you're not doing it all alone, and you can really just like get all this amazing help and come through. And sometimes there's a lot of doubt, like, if you've just discovered that mediumship quality, and as you said, to trust it, it's a big thing.
Yeah.
And I know with, that being able to tune into the plants when I'm guided to make an essence and listen and communicate with the diva of the flower to get that information. What is the healing quality of this flower? And, I used to worry that what happens if that suddenly stops? Like I've had this ability, and then back in the early days, what happens if I tune a plant and I don't get anything anymore? So that was always a little bit of a worry. But I think from that stillness, you get so much information that you feel good within yourself. You think, wow, I'm able to achieve a lot. Like I was writing a book, and in a meditation, it came through basically the whole layout, the template of what the book would be. I'd been thinking about that on a conscious level, and then 20-minute meditation, in probably a few minutes of that 20 minutes, the whole thing just fell into place. Oh yeah, this will be the introduction. This is the chapters. This is the flow of how the book will go. And it's like being able to access all that inner wisdom. It allows you that confidence, and to know that there's more than just your mind and doing everything. That there's just that other aspect of yourself, and it gives you that fuller picture and feeling good about who you are in totality.
When I'm talking to you, you do have that beautiful energy of being present, of being here in the now. Do you think that your connection with the plant kingdom has really assisted you in being present? And on the same note, I would love to know, if you feel comfortable to share, how you work through some of your limiting beliefs, such as the fear that you mentioned earlier about maybe not being able to access the wisdom of the plants.
Yeah, look, I think any time that you're out in nature, it's going to ground you, and you can pick up all that healing energy of the plants. And even if people have never heard of flower essence, I think when they know how they feel when they go walking in nature, it's basically, that's what the essences are. It's like a manifested physical version of what we just intuitively pick up and how we feel when we feel in nature. And I think during those crazy times of COVID, when people, were restricted, and, my local area in Sydney, like you couldn't even just lie on the beach, you had to be physically active, and a lot of people weren't even allowed to go to beaches, and they were locked up. And, not being able to get in contact with nature made people very anxious and fearful, as well as what else was going on around them. So certainly having that ability to go out in nature is very grounding for you. And one of my other passions is body surfing. So luckily I live very close to the beach, and there's a lot of my work, there tends to be a predominance of females in there. Like in my workshops, we have 55% women, and predominance of women in we have 20 staff, and I think there's only 2 other men there. So body surfing, there's this group of men that we go body surfing every morning. There's 3 in their 80s, quite a few in the 70s. I'm just a young whippersnapper in the 60s. And, so that's, you get out in the water and nature, and it also helps ground you as well. You're walking barefoot on the sand to get out in the water. So all of those things, being with the plants or being in nature generally is going to ground you.
Do you think that also helps when you have those worrying beliefs and those negative thoughts? I know for myself, I think that's one of my big challenges, is being here in the now, being present, and not allowing the monkey mind to kind of run away with itself. Do you find that, do you have any tips or tricks that you used in the past? I know that you definitely have some bush flower remedies that can assist people with that. But, for yourself, when you were talking about that limiting belief or that fear that maybe the connection wouldn't be there, did that go away when you were amongst?
Well, because it never left, but it was like in the back of my mind, what about if suddenly this all stops? I stopped getting that communication directly with the plants. And fortunately, it never did. And I think the more that you keep your own spiritual practice, whether it's doing the rosary or it's doing Tai Chi or it's a meditation, I think that's just going to strengthen all those skills and abilities and allow that, as you talked about, the higher self to come through, where you get that greater understanding. One of the flowers is called Black-Eyed Susan, and it's a remedy for people always on the go, trying to do too much. They're usually poor time managers. There's this sense of rushing and stress. And, for me, that I recognize that as my constitutional remedy. And, I think working with that essence and also doing meditation have been the two saving graces for me. I shudder to think, what I'd like if I hadn't had those, 40 years of doing meditation and things like that. So I think there's lots of tools that we can do. I think we can recognize where our areas that aren't so strong, needing a bit of boosting up. And then, that's certainly for me, the essences can come and help with that.
Yeah, 100%. Just before we get into the whole conversation of the essences, because I feel like there's going to be some great insights that you'll be able to share in terms of that subject. I want to know, for you, what do you believe is the higher self?
I think that's semantics gets a bit tricky here, doesn't it, Lauren?
It does. It does.
That the higher self is almost like that that soul aspect of ourselves that comes here to learn and grow and integrate experiences. And it's that part which directly connects us back to spirit, about the spiritual essence of who we are, what we've chosen, not just this lifetime, but say this whole series of incarnations on this planet. It's we've got our personality, and we've got all the a thing called mass consciousness. So the thoughts and feelings of every person who's ever lived on the planet, it's like this psychic cloud around the planet. So when a baby is born, they just take on all these beliefs and fears and all the joys, all those emotions that people have previously experienced. And then you've got your family limiting patterns as well, and your personality, and clouding all over that the spiritual essence of who you are. Yeah. And often, we forget that connection of who we were, what we were doing in the spirit realm before we come down. So, it's that sense of, this is who I am, this is what I've come here to do, and I'm more than just the personality.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating. I want to share with you, and I've mentioned it on the show before, but so Eckhart Tolle I always talk about him ad nauseum, but he really taught me so much about being in the present moment and all that kind of stuff. And have you read his books, Ian?
No, I've listened to some of his tapes, and it's interesting that you've had great benefit staying in the now. For me, he puts me to sleep.
Yeah, so
maybe I have to read his books rather than listen to him.
Yes, that's very possible. And it's funny because many people have that. But one of the things that I wanted to share is that he shares the story of how he wanted to commit suicide. And he was in this situation where he said to himself, I cannot live with myself any longer. And then when he did that, he went, I cannot live with myself any longer. There must be two of me. And when he said that there must be two of me, he had sort of a separation where he started to understand the personality versus, I guess we could say, the higher self in this situation here, the soul. And it's funny because I read that many, many years ago, and I listened to him on a regular basis. And I was reading another book, and they use that example as well, not his, but they use that, there must be two of me. And I remember I said it out loud to myself, I cannot live with myself any longer. There must be two of me. And I felt almost like this suction into the back of my head where I went, there I am. There I am in present. There I am as the soul, and not as the personality, and not as the mind. And I wanted to share that because I just know how much healing I got from that one thing that it really put me in almost, I've been calling it in the soul seat. I know Gary Zukav calls it the seat of the soul, but it puts me in that higher awareness. For you, is there anything that you do that to kind of take yourself out of being the personality? Is it just about that awareness? Are there tools that you use that on a regular basis? Maybe the body surfing is a good example of that.
Yeah, for me, I think when I'm actually in the bush and I'm working with the flowers, if I'm making an essence, I'm really just tuned in. It's like as a part of me disappears, and it's just taking in, allowing all that, because there's usually a very strong spiritual presence when essence is being made. It's just like feeling all that and connecting very much to the plant, feeling what the message the plant is conveying back to me, and it just flows so well. And it's like that second part of you takes a back step, and that spiritual part is just fully there and aware of everything going on around you.
I had this experience a couple of months ago where I was outside on my deck, and I'm very lucky. I live on a beautiful property, and we have neighbors, but they're not very close. And I remember I was standing out, and spoiler alert, I did have a couple scotches, I will just say, but I was very in tune with what was going on around me. And it was like I felt the 5D. I felt the oneness of all that there is. It's as though I could feel the wind through my skin, and I just felt everything around me singing. And it was absolutely incredible. And it's not a feeling that I have all the time. Although if I put myself in the position again, not having all the scotch, but standing out there with the intention of connecting to that feeling of nature and oneness, I just feel that, that nature, that's singing to us. It's telling us a message. It's connecting with our energy and with our soul. Do you remember the first time that happened for you?
I'm not sure it's the first time, but one of the essences that it's actually the logo for our company is the Waratah. And it's in the Davic realm, they say there's five master flowers on the planet, and Waratah is one of those. And it was the only flower the Aborigines gave to the white settlers when they came, because it was their highest flower. And I got all the information about Waratah, but then it was right at the end of the flowering season. So, because I'd been in contact with this fellow who was John Dixon, he was a professor of botany at Sydney University, he told me that there's an area in the Blue Mountains, which is a couple of hours inland from Sydney, so it's colder, and therefore the flowers come out a little bit later, that they were renowned for the last flowering Waratahs in the state. And he gave me their contact number, and they said, well, because you come through, Professor Dixon will let you know where that spot is. We trust him. And I didn't want to have to wait, like it would have been 10, 11 months before this remedy was able to make it around Sydney. And I knew it helped so many people. And, I was able to rearrange, cancel a lot of appointments, so create the space to make it a few days' time. And the weather changed. The night before, it was really raining very heavily. The forecast in the Blue Mountains that day was going to be bucketing with rain. And it was heavy in Sydney. It was about a 2-hour drive for me. And I thought, the night before, is it worth going? And then in the meditation, I saw a beautiful Waratah, and I thought, this is a very good omen. Yes. So next morning, again, bucketing rain. When I got there after the drive, it was still heavy rain. I went wandering around the area, and there were a lot of Waratahs, but they'd passed their peak. In fact, the people who said I could go there said we were there about a week before. They've all finished flowering, or they're not in perfect bloom, but you're welcome to have a look. And just being that close with so many Waratahs, there's wonderful energy to it. So I was just enjoying it, but the rain was heavy. Then I went down a gully, and there was a creek. And next to the creek was a Waratah in full bloom. And when I looked closer, the markings on the stem were the same as the Waratah I'd seen the night before in the meditation. Oh. So I just sat down, and I was just, had an umbrella, and I'm meditating. And then all of a sudden, just around me, there was about a 3-meter diameter of sunlight. Suddenly, as if the clouds being pulled and the sun came down. I was like, whoa, this is a bit spooky. So I got all my equipment out, and I was expecting just to disappear, and it didn't. So I, prepared the essence, and that sunlight stayed around the waratah in the bowl for the full 2 hours. And the exact time when I was taking the waratah out to pour the water into the brandy, which is the concentrate, the sky went black and started hailing. And while I was, this shaft of sunlight, there was probably it was dry for about another 10 meters, and then the rain was coming down. It was almost like spirit was saying, okay, you've got 2 hours starting now, and it pulled the clouds apart. And it was just like, for me, I think I put a chapter in my first book called The Magic of Making the Essences, that synchronicity, or how things happen to, that there's real alchemic interaction between not just me and the plant kingdom, but also the spiritual kingdom when the essences are being made.
I love that story so much. And you really paint such a strong picture about that communion with that flower, right? The exchange of that energy. Can you share a little bit about the process of harvesting or receiving the remedy? Yeah.
The earliest records of flower essence use go back to ancient Egypt. So we're looking 3,000 years ago. There's records in papyrus where they'd collect the dew of flowers to treat emotional imbalances. And the earliest written records outside of, or European written records, is Hildegard von Bingen. And I'm sure probably many people listening will have know her through her music. She was an abbess born in 1098. She recently became a Catholic saint. You have to wait a long time if you have to be sainthood for sometimes. And she ran a monastery. She, advocated education for women is equal to boys. She brought through a lot of information on nutrition, on herbs, and she would have the nuns lay muslin sheets out overnight on the flowers. In the morning, the flowers would have given off their dew, been absorbed in by the muslin sheets. They'd wring it out, and they'd use it to treat people's imbalances. And if they were very sick, then they'd wrap them in the sheets for hydrotherapy as well. And, Paracelsus also collected the dew of flowers in this very way. It was around in the 16th century. And if we look at indigenous cultures, like different parts of Australia, history of using the flowers in South America, Brazil, India, Malaysia. So there's a lot of use of flowers for healing emotions. And then a lot of that knowledge seemed to be lost. And we had a modern rediscoverer, a man called Edward Bach, who's a Welsh doctor. And in the 1930s, he developed the Bach flower essences, 39 remedies from predominantly English plants. And he did 2 methods. He would pick flowers, put them in water, and the sun would release that healing energy of the flower into the water. Or sometimes he would boil the buds to get it. Now, one of the remedies I make up is the boab. The boab trees grow in the Kimberleys. And when I made this essence up a couple of years ago, it was 47 degrees that day. So we don't need to boil the essences. And so I use that, out of reverence, I think, for Bach, I use that same, what he called the sunshine method. Because he too originally used to collect the dew of the flowers, but it was very time consuming. He was quite an impatient character. So he simulated what nature was doing. So I don't grow any of the flowers. That I prefer to find them growing in their natural habitats, because you know what the environment's like here. You mentioned all the heavy rain you've been getting lately, and we go through droughts and floods, and the plants have to be very hardy to survive that way. So they're the ones I want to work with, not one that I've grown, I've watered and given it manure and all sorts of different things. So having really waited for the plant to communicate to me that it's ready. For example, earlier this year, we released the first new bush essence in 19 years. So, it's not so much like, oh, I'm bored, there's nothing to do, nothing on Netflix, I think I'll go and make a flower essence. It's really waiting for that plant to communicate to me that its time is ready.
Oh, wow.
And so having, that communication already started, I'll go to a pristine environment, and first thing I do then is just because sometimes I might have to drive for, an hour or two, then you're walking sometimes a couple of hours to get to the location. So I'll sit, ground myself, do some meditation. Then I'll draw the flower or do the photography. And this allows you to look in detail at the how many petals, how many stamens. And I find this ties in very nicely with my numerology that, it's got 5 petals. We know it's working strongly on the emotions, or it's got yellow in color therapy. No, this is probably going to be working on a mental level. So you're getting all those clues. And there's a term called doctrine of signatures, where the shape, the color, the location where the plant grows are all clues as to the healing quality of that particular flower. So by drawing it, that gives me that insight. I get new awareness about it. And then I'll meditate with the flower again, this time asking the diva to, what is the healing gift that's bringing to humanity, and just being open to any other messages that come through. And at that point, when I feel like, okay, I've got the information I need, the flower is picked. And again, I would ask permission, rather than, grab a flower, put in a bowl. And sometimes I had a strong sense that, no, this is not an appropriate flower, but on another bush nearby, it's okay. So maybe there were disease in the roots, or the life force wasn't as strong. And even on still day, so let's say I'm working with a bush, maybe it's a couple of meters tall, lots of flowers, and I'll say, which one wants to be used to help heal humankind? And on still days, some will start shaking and vibrating. It's almost saying, pick me, pick me. And you can tune in, you can feel the energy of a flower, like how far back does the energy, go of that flower. And the ones which are shaking, vibrating, almost invariably have the strongest energy. It's almost like the plant saying, these are my best examples, take these ones. So then I try and keep myself separate, so I wouldn't touch the flower I'm picking, but I use maybe a leaf or a stem to pluck the flower, so I'm separate from it energetically, and I'll take it to a bowl filled with water, and I'll fill the surface area of the bowl with the flowers. Now, if you're dealing with a Banksia, you might not need very many, or a Guy Lily. It's like trying to find a bowl big enough for just the one flower anyway. And in England, when Bach was doing his work, it took about 4 hours for the sun to release the energy, but our sun's stronger. So it's about an hour and a half of direct sunlight to release the vibration of the flower into the water. At which point the flowers are discarded. That water is added to brandy, because that's the water has the healing vibration. And that's, we call the mother tincture, and it's diluted down to a stock strength, which is a practitioner or someone who's going to use the essence a lot would use. And they, from the stock, they would make up a dose bottle, which is what the strength the person takes. And for bush essences, we take 7 drops morning and night for 2 weeks if it's emotional. If it's physical, we take it, say, for a month.
Wow, that was awesome. What a ride. Okay, Ian, I just want to say, first of all, that I've always been very curious, and I know that in past lives I worked with plants, and I just haven't tapped into that yet in this life, and I'm in the process of remembering. And that was so cool when you were talking about the amount of petals, and what came to me right away was, okay, so some flowers have, let's say curved petals that might be softened. There might be a softening quality of that, whereas some might be more spiky. That might be more action oriented, maybe more of a yang energy, for example. That was so cool. Thank you for sharing that in that way. That was just awesome. When you're making this mix, how do you know that the flowers have done their job? Do you notice that the life force within them has changed?
Yeah, I'll tune in and to work out specifically how long it needs. And if you at that time, at that point when they've released, there's like the flowers go limp. You can feel the energy in the bowl change. Now you can leave them longer than that, but they have to be at least that amount of time.
Okay. And with brandy, do you just buy brandy from the shop? Or
no, like we've we export to 40 different countries, so we have large quantities. We get big drums. In fact, you've got to make sure your premises are fireproof because it's very inflammable. You've also got because we're not using it as a beverage, we've got to account for all the brandy we're used. We get audited to make sure that we're not selling it on the slide like that. So we look for manufacturers who can give us large enough quantities of the brandy. Yeah.
Oh, that's just so cool. So one of the things that you talked about, and I will tell you that my personality type is I prefer to figure things out and then go, oh, that's not how you do it. Then maybe I'll figure out how to do it. So I'm not very good at reading directions. Okay. That's where I'm actually trying to go with this. But that aside, I didn't realize until reading your book that you should be taking these essences for 2 weeks, rising and resting. And one of the things I
just want to warn the audience that this might finish very abruptly in a minute after your confession, but go on.
Say that again.
I was just saying, warning the viewers that our interview could end abruptly.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Just don't get alarmed if it suddenly stops mid-sentence or something like that.
Okay, you've warned me as well. Thank you. I'll watch my words from now on. But yeah, I guess what happened, what I've been using bush flower for, and I feel that I've been doing it as an injustice to myself and not correctly, is I'll go, oh, I might be maybe spiraling in the head and I don't feel very good or something, so I'll take some emergency. Or maybe I'm struggling today with manifesting clients, so I'll take some Abund. Or my I feel like my brain isn't as clear and sharp as it could be, so I'll take some Boost or Cognus or something like that. So, but I think that I've been doing myself a disservice. I think I've been incorrectly using the product. Now, that being said, when I've used things like Rescue Remedy before, if I have anxiety and I take it right away, it really helps me right away. So I guess I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that idea. And I do know that in your book, you do talk about also listening to your own intuition. And I have a couple of the white light essences. I bought the Devic and also the Fire.
Yep.
And I've always felt intuitively not to put the fire in the water. It just felt really wrong. So I've just always put it under my tongue, which is what I normally do anyway. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, about how do the remedies work? Can they work in the way that I've been using them? And how long, you're talking about working on the emotions maybe for 2 weeks and longer if necessary, and then maybe a month longer if necessary for the physical. So yeah, can you just elaborate a little bit more on that?
And I think those two essences in particular, emergency, like if something acute happens and you get upset, then certainly you can work on your emergency essence, as a one-off one. You might normally suggest taking one remedy at a time. So, like if you might be taking, say, Abund essence for a 2-week period, but you get some bad news or you slip and fall over, you can certainly take some emergencies as a one-off. Yesterday, like we have a manufacturing license at our premises, and we go upstairs, downstairs, and my dog comes in with me on the days I go to the office, and one of the staff said, "Oh my goodness, we just found Rosie, and she's found a rat bait." Now this must have been incredibly old. It was behind old pallets. One of the guys who worked there for 7 years in the warehouse. He said, "I've never seen bait like this before." So we don't. Fortunately, I'm a bit old, but so they found it in her mouth and they pulled it out and we put it in a tissue. And I'm thinking, oh, if it's rat bait, then this is pretty serious. Yeah. I'm upset. I took some emergency, gave her some emergency, and rushed her off the vet so they could pump her stomach out, hopefully before it got absorbed. So, as a one-off remedy, emergency is great in situations like that when there's an upset or what have you. Same as if you've got, you're writing something, or you got work project and you're not focusing very well, you can use a one-off dose of what used to be called Cognus. We've just changed the name now to Focus, and that's fine. But if you're working with an issue that's been around for longer, let's say you're working with, it could be, you're feeling guilty about something. Probably a one-off dose won't be enough to clear it. That's why we're suggesting that you're working with for 2 weeks. And we say the physical for longer because let's take jealousy. If you're jealous, you can see in the aura a murky green. Now, let's say the neighbor's got a new car and you're feeling jealous. You could take some Mountain Devil and that'll help shift it pretty quick. But if you've been jealous and, for a really long time, or you've got jealousy, rage, hatred, all those emotions affect gallbladder. So if you've been feeling those long enough, it will gradually seep in from those outer bodies and come and impact on the physical, and you'll end up, with your gallbladder having some problems. And a classic example of that was, a former Queensland politician who was the Prime Minister at the time, who got sacked by his own party. And there was photos of him in the back benches a few days later, and you could see the rage and the fumes coming out of his head. He was so angry. And then, a message came through about a week later that he'd been rushed off for emergency operation and had to remove his gallbladder. So if you've got gallbladder problems, those emotions which have triggered it just mean they've been there for a much longer period than if you're just feeling the emotion of, say, jealousy or got some rage happening, whatever. So on an emotional level, we'll clear it. But if it's gone for the physical, you've been feeling those emotions for a lot longer. So therefore, you need generally to take the remedies for longer. But we've had people have had amazing physical changes. A woman, she was crippled with arthritis. It was like, deformities. And I gave a remedy, Sturt Desert Pea, for sadness, because she'd had this for about 4 years, but it started when her husband left her for another woman. So when I gave her the Sturt Desert Pea, she rang back 4 or 5 days later, saying, Ian, all I've done is cry. But she said, you won't believe this, the pain has gone. She couldn't even sit in the chair when she came. She had to stand up because she was in so much pain. And she said, the deformity's gone. Now, if you told that to a rheumatologist that you could lose deformity in 5 days, they would just laugh at you. So it's totally physically impossible. Yet when you get to that emotional trigger, release, it's amazing some of the healing that can take place on a physical level.
Oh, that's just so powerful. And I feel so much emotion when you say that. I just can't even imagine her new lease on life from that. It feels to me as though I always knew, because I started with the Bach flower, and it wasn't until I couldn't get what I used to order that I discovered bush flower, in your business. And, I knew because I'd read it, that, it treated on an emotional level, but I don't really think that I understood that it actually does clear, but you need to commit to it. It's sort of as though, you're saying, okay, I'm making the intention of clearing this thing, and I'm going to put in a little bit of the work and co-create with this elixir that I'm putting in to go ahead and to move that onwards. Do you find that when people go through, let's say 2 weeks of that, or 3 weeks, if they feel that it's required, that they every so often need to repeat that again? Or do you find that it varies from person to person? Sometimes it could clear and never come back, or I guess it's a long life, depending on.
I mentioned the black-eyed Susan being like a constitutional remedy.
Right.
And I think we've all got a constitutional remedy. And what the bush essence can do when you identify that, as you work with it, and it'll bring it back more into a balance. But if something happens, you get sick, or, you get really upset, there'll be a tendency to go back to that impatient, irritable, annoyed state. Right. But if you've been working with that flower, it'll bring you back into balance a lot quicker. So the first time you take, you might be, I've always been like this. Okay, let's take it for a month. Oh yeah, I feel a lot better. And the extremes don't happen as much, and you stay more in a balanced state. And if you do go out, it can bring you back a bit quicker. Whereas it could be just, I remember had a car accident a number of years ago, and, there was a P plate, and it was a bush party, and there was a dirt road. They overshot and they pulled over. I had learners on. I'm thinking, what's this person doing? And I'm just waiting. And then I decided to carefully go around them. And then they, without indicating, they just did a U-turn and went straight into my car. Oh. And the police came, and blah, blah, blah. And then I got a call from the officer a couple of days later saying they were going to charge me. And I'm going, me? I'm being charged for this? And so I actually went to court, and they perjured themselves, came up with all these different stories. And I couldn't stop thinking about that. Maybe I should have done this now. Why didn't I get photos? And I just couldn't stop thinking about it. So we have a remedy called Baronia. So I started working with Baronia, and that really cleared it. Now, that was a one-off one. So it dealt with what I was dealing with, which meant, it's not going to be coming back again. So
yes.
If it's something which is just comes up, maybe it's grief, you're, a loved one has died, or your pet died. So you're having a lot of sadness. Like the essences will deal with that acute. But if it's something that's always ongoing, that you have a tendency to always feel a bit vague and spacey, or always tend to get overwhelmed, or you're a very anxious, fearful type person, you'll need to work longer with that essence, but it'll bring you back into a balance.
Oh, that's just so beautiful. And going back to what you talked about earlier too, is when we're born, we're being saturated by the ideas of the planet and all of the humans and souls on it, as well as our own families and our DNA. So we are carrying, especially for those of us who, I think anyone listening to this podcast would understand about past lives, we're also carrying however many lifetimes worth of baggage and worth of trauma and challenges that we can clear when we're, I guess one of the big parts about it is being aware that it's there, finding the correct remedy, and then putting in the time, and probably paired with meditation would be helpful as well, I would imagine.
Yeah. And the nice thing with flower essences is we're dealing with things you don't have to be trained. You can recognize when someone is feeling a lot of sadness, or they're feeling rejection because of different things that have happened. And especially with our children, they didn't get invited to the birthday party that all the other friends got invited to. You're going to feel pretty dreadful. So, we can give them the remedy dealing with that rejection and what have you, or not feeling good, or there's something wrong with me, and self-esteem.
But you don't have to rehash it all either. I mean, that's always been one of the kind of the things that I've had is like, I know some people prefer to go back to the trauma and rework through it. And I'm not saying, I feel like people need to do what's right for them intuitively. For me, I have more to do here on this earth than to go back and worry about stuff that's over and done with, honestly. So I want to just heal so I can move forward and do what I came here to do. And I love that the flower essences allow you that sort of graceful way of doing that. Although much like the woman who was suffering with the arthritis, there may be tears that need to come. There may be some kind of outlay that has to happen as well alongside that.
Sure. And on a physical level, we have a combination called purifying, which is a really good detox. Now, as well as working on liver and kidney, lymphatics, large intestine, it's working with the emotions that go with those organs as well. So it's a very powerful essence. And we've had people who haven't smoked for 10, 15 years. Nicotine's come out on the fingers they used to hold their cigarette with. We have a remedy called Mula Mula, which is dealing with heat, trauma with fire, heat, etc. And we've had people take it, old sunburns come out in their body. We've even had quite a few people where burn marks have come out on their legs, and they've had flashbacks of being burnt at the stake. And when we think that, something like 9 million women and 1 million men were burnt at the stake as witches, over a 300-year period, which were basically all the healers and the church trying to take power from them. So if you're a herbalist back then, you're burnt and called a witch.
Oh, yeah.
So, all that on that physical level, still carrying through some of the trauma from those areas. Or you find that people who they don't want to go swimming, they feel uncomfortable putting their head underwater, and you find there's a past life where they've drowned. Now, you don't have to keep going back, but you can work with the essences and you'll shift it. Or sometimes I get flashbacks, especially with the white light essences. There's 4 elemental ones: earth, air, fire, water. You mentioned the fire that you had there along with the Davik.
Yeah.
So we've probably all had experiences where we've died as a result of too much of that element. We've been burnt to death, etc., etc. You think of all the times in the past where it was wooden houses, the heating and the lighting was fires. or, we've frozen to death. So there's that not enough of that element. So, you don't have to go back and rehash it, but like when you take it, it's interesting, some of the quick flashbacks as you're releasing and clearing trauma associated with those elements.
Oh, it's absolutely fascinating. One thing too that you mentioned when your dog got rat bait, that you also used it for your pet. So these things are also fine, aren't they? These bush flowers to assist our animals as well, who I believe absorb a hell of a lot of stuff from ourselves so that we don't have to deal with it.
Yeah, it's part of their service to us, isn't it? To take on.
I always tell my dog, stop it. Let me deal with my own stuff.
And their program, they probably won't listen on a conscious level to that. That's what I'm here to do.
Your book? Yeah, exactly. This is why I'm here.
And the beauty of the animals and the children, and we're talking about young babies as well, is it's not a placebo effect. They've got no conscious idea why giving them remedies, and you can see the results and the change. In fact, they don't have as many emotional blocks and barriers to children, so the essences work very quickly, and especially on animals. Look, we've actually got a book written by one of our staff on animal healing, and the anecdotes that we collect from people, using the essences are fantastic. And we even had like one woman in her fish tank, one of the fish was getting aggressive, attacking the others. So she put the mountain devil, the remedy for aggression, into the water in the fish tank, and the behavior settled down. So, like it's, whether dogs who are very distressed because, the owners are not at home with them at all, or very timid dogs, or, all sorts of different things. The essences work quickly, and on cats as well.
Oh, it's just so cool. So are you familiar with the book Heal Your Body by Louise Hay?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So your book here, which I'm lucky enough to have, is the Australian Bushflower Remedy. And for our friends on YouTube, I've held it up. But if you're listening, you won't see it. Just go to Ian's website and you'll be able to see it. I'll put links to everything in the show notes, by the way. But I just love how it's set up. It reminded me a little bit about Heal Your Body. And I almost kind of thought, okay, so you can go through it. You can go, okay, I'm dealing with this fear of success, and kind of look and find, almost the bush flower that's going to help you with that. So it's sort of set up in a way that you have a negative condition and a positive outcome. So do you think that you have to have the negative condition to have the positive outcome? Can you want the positive outcome without having the negative condition?
You can enhance the positive aspects without having to have the negative.
Yes, you can go with both ways. And I thought it was sort of interesting to kind of like flick through and see which one I landed on. And what was it that I landed on a little while ago? I landed on, I think it was Boost. I think that's the one that I landed on, because I sort of got to the end or something like that. I went to the end, but it's such a cool book. And one of the things that I love about it is the variety that you have. So I know we're about to wrap up here for a second. I've just absolutely loved talking to you. I will put a link to everything in the show notes. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to speak on? Because the white light essences are amazing, like where you travel to get, just Ian, I could talk to you all afternoon. That's why I asked you to timestamp this. So we're at time now.
Yeah. Oh, look, yes, and in some ways it's the great benefit that we cover so many things. You can have someone dealing with addiction. You can get another one just dealing with wanting to enhance their creativity, or said, look at the spiritual ones, clearing spiritual blockages. So, and we also have some other books, some larger books where there's emotional repertory. So you can look in the back.
Oh.
And so if you've got eating disorders, or you've got rejection or whatever, and then you'll find the essences balancing it that way. Even we've just relaunched our website and revamped it, and there's a whole section there on symptoms people can go to, and it will help you funnel down to find appropriate essences dealing with that. So I think maybe just to summarize it, it's totally safe. There's no side effects. You're getting to the cause of problems, and so if you go and have a look, see if there's something there that resonates and jumps up with you. And I was impressed when you said fear of success. I had a patient 2 hours ago in the States. We're doing a Zoom, and that's the thing that came up for her was a fear of success. So I like how your mediumship is coming through things up.
Yeah, it happens sometimes. You're like, oh, there that is again.
Yeah. And there's essences to deal with the fears or the sabotages. And so really I see the essences as to give us the strength and courage to follow our life purpose and direction, and also to get us in touch with what that is, basically, and enhance our lives.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. And just on that beautiful note, like, we're here to do a job. We are not here not to do a job. We are here to live our purpose. We're not sent to earth. We didn't choose to come here, I believe, to suffer.
Yeah.
And we came here to clear our stuff so we can become the powerful souls that we were meant to be. And, we can choose to suffer or not.
Yeah, we've got so much joy open to us. Let's go and experience some joy here, as well as, having fun doing what we do.
Yeah, 100%. Ian, thank you so much. Please do come back on the show anytime you feel comfortable. You are more than welcome. And for our listener at home, I will put a link to all of Ian's contacts, his fabulous books, his website, and he's got online courses as well and workshops. And, as Ian mentioned before as well, he does ship internationally. So for our American and our worldwide audience, that's very important for you to know. Thank you, Ian.
Thanks, Lauren. Bye-bye.